Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your support, the support of Dean Hammoudi and the school. So, what I want to talk about is the Ferguson Effect. And I think you probably have some idea, but it's always a good idea to start with the definition. So here's one that I think will serve. The idea is this: crime in the United States is surging, and the reason for this is that protests against police misconduct, such as those we saw in Ferguson or Black Lives Matter, and the accompanying video of police misconduct we're seeing so often, that these are causing police officers to back off from proactive styles of policing. And this allows criminals to operate freely, and this is what's causing the new crime wave. This is the idea of the Ferguson Effect. If we were meeting 1 week ago today, and by the way, that was our first choice for dates, and we just couldn't make it happen. But if we were 1 week ago today, this is where I would start with this lady, Heather Mcdonald of the Manhattan Institute. She's been the foremost proponent of the idea of the Ferguson Effect, and she's actually set out some evidence in her writing, and she's a good place to start. She's actually put a marker down and said, this is real, here it is, and this is why I think this. But something happened last week, and this week, it's still happening right now, that makes this subject actually more interesting, more vital, and has put it more in the news, and it has to do with this fellow right here. The director of the FBI, James Comey. The FBI doesn't have a stellar record on issues of race. Let's just leave it at that. I can talk about that in Q&A if you want. But to everybody's surprise, he weighed in last February with a very interesting speech at Georgetown University about the history of law enforcement and maybe why there's been so much back and forth about the role of law enforcement, the mistrust between law enforcement and communities. Well, last Friday, something else happened. He gave another speech, this time at his alma mater, the University of Chicago Law School. And as part of that speech, here's, again, I apologize for the amount of text I'm throwing at you. It won't stay like this, I promise. But I got to give you what he said. He says, in today's YouTube world, our officers reluctant to get out of their cars and do the work that controls violent crime. I spoke to officers privately in one big city precinct who described being surrounded by young people with mobile phone cameras held high, taunting them the moment they got out of their cars. They told me, quote, "We feel like we're under siege and we don't feel much like getting out of our cars." So the question that has been asked of me is whether these kinds of things are changing police behavior all over the country. The Ferguson Effect, in so many words. Here is how his speech played. And this was just last Friday. Okay? So here's the New York Times. FBI chief links scrutiny of police with rise in violent crime. USA Today, FBI director links viral videos of police to rise in violence. Newsmax, FBI's Comey, scrutiny of police may be helping violent crimes rise. Okay? That was the headline. Now, the media doesn't always get everything exactly right. They have to choose to emphasize certain things. We all know that. But they left a little part of it out. It does seem to me, this was that last sentence I gave you, and then he follows that with, and the answer is, I don't know. But if you read the whole thing in context, and I would invite you to do that, it's up on the FBI website. You can read the whole speech. It was up the same day. He was clearly wanting to get this message out. It's very clear that he's saying that it likely is true that this Ferguson Effect is happening. It could not have been clearer what he was implying, even if he added the little "I don't know." All right, so read it for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. It was there. That was clearly the message he was trying to get across. Now, what happened next? Monday, this week, October 26th, he is at the International Association of Chiefs of Police in Chicago, their annual meeting. And he got a lot of blowback, it seemed, from the U.S. Department of Justice, the White House, many others on his Friday speech at University of Chicago. What did he do? He gave almost the same speech on Monday to the IACP, and he really kind of doubled down on this idea that police are backing off because of criticism that they're receiving and because of video that people are seeing. Right? So he puts it in a little more tentative terms, but it's clearly still the same idea. Now, I can't give you a quote, it turns out, because this speech isn't up on the website. It's not available yet. I looked everywhere. I wonder why. Well, that's, we can all wonder about that. So, the Ferguson Effect. The question for me is, what's the evidence? I mean, we're a law school, we're in a university. If this is true, I want to know it's true so that we can figure out how to address it. All right? As Dean Moody told you, I spend a lot of my time working with police, working with different groups in in communities. My main thing is to try to bridge that gap, to try to be a bridge over the great river of mistrust. And if this is there, if this is a real problem, I want to know. All right? So we have really two questions. Number one, is there a new national crime wave that's happening? And number two, is that being caused by the Ferguson effect? Both of these two things are part of that core assertion. So now we can go back to Heather Mcdonald. All right? Because unlike Jim Comey, Heather Mcdonald has actually put evidence down on the table. She doesn't just have stories. Well, she's got plenty of those. She's a very good writer. She's highly persuasive. She's a good speaker. She's been around a while. She knows how to persuade people. I give her a lot of credit. And so I want to take her at face value exactly what she has to say. And this was her piece in the Wall Street Journal on May 30th of 2015. This really kicked off the national discussion of this some months back. Here's what she says. The most plausible explanation of the current surge in lawlessness is the intense agitation against American police departments over the past 9 months. 9 months from May 30th would take you back roughly to the events in Ferguson. The incessant drumbeat against police, she says, has, quote, empowered criminals. The Ferguson effect. All right? So, she cites a number of pieces of evidence. All right? Number one, she says, homicides in New York City in 2015, way up. Way up. Number two, LA, next biggest city. Homicides in 2015, up. And murders of police, she says, up 89% in 2014. Okay, so she's put some evidence out. I suggest we test it, that's all. And you notice what this is evidence of. This is evidence of the existence of the crime wave. We haven't gotten to the second question yet. What's causing it? All right. Couple of one or two preliminary points, maybe just one. All right. Crime trends. Always a lot of discussion about trends in crime. It's worth discussing. It's worth understanding. When Heather Mcdonald makes the statement she does in the Wall Street Journal on May 30th, 2015, she says, the first 5 months of 2015, which we're just ending, off the charts, homicide is going through the roof. She talks in terms of time since Ferguson, which would have been 9 months. So the question is 5 months a trend in crime statistics? Is 9 months a trend? Let me give you a hint. No. No. I mean, it's not. Not. Okay? That's not, you can't think that way, all right? Well, how about now? Okay, so we're a little further along. It's the end of October of 2015, so we're 14 months since Ferguson. What about 14 months? Even 14 months is not something is still something you want to be careful about, because any trend upward is coming against a 20-year trend downward in homicides and, frankly, all kinds of violent crime and property crime. It's all been going down for 20 straight years. So if you were looking for a new surge that's going to reverse this, I would suggest waiting at least until the 2015 figures come out, but probably longer than that. You'd probably want 2 years, maybe 3. All right? So skepticism, I think, has to be the order of the day. Doesn't mean that she's wrong. It just means watch out, okay? All right, so first thing she cited, homicides up in New York City. What's the evidence? Actually, homicides in New York City is still at the historic low levels that they have been. It has been a 20-year decrease. I think most people probably know something about the New York City story over this period of time. Homicides in this very big city going from the ranges of 2,000 and 2,100 and 2,200 murders a year down into the low hundreds, like 300. I mean, that's still a terrible toll, but for a city that size, anywhere on the globe, that's actually pretty surprisingly safe. If current trends continue this year, this year's totals will be lower actually than 2010, so lower than 5 years ago. So it looks like things are actually continuing to go down. As of August 31st of 2015, we're basically on pace with 2014. No big changes up or down, either way. New York City tells us one other very interesting thing if you look at the numbers. Other serious crimes, okay, robberies, burglaries, larcenies, huge declines this year. Big declines this year in all three of those categories, and those are among the three most important categories that the FBI tracks, homicide being another one. So if, and they're, I mean, they're at historic low points for this year over already very low points for 2014, right? So if police are pulling back, why wouldn't it affect this too? I mean, it wouldn't just affect homicide, it would affect all kinds of things. Certainly robberies, right? Threat of force, use of force to take other people's property. I mean, they got to be taken that as seriously as anything else in New York, right? Instead of going down, instead of going up, they're actually going way, way down lower than they have been. So the evidence in New York does not seem to support the hypothesis, I should say the first part of the hypothesis, which is crime is surging upward. In fact, here's the end of the summer. Here's Bill Bratton, the commissioner, announcing the safest summer in 25 years. Now, all right, he's a political figure as well as the leader of the police department, so he's got a reason to call it the safest summer and all that, but the numbers back him up. All right, you can brag as long as you can back it up. So there it is. Right, that's the story as we know it in New York. What about Los Angeles? Los Angeles, different city, still a large city, still a city that lots of people are watching, a city that also has had some remarkable success really in the last 6 to 8 years. I mean, they've had a long downward trend too, but the last 6 to 8 years have been still downward, and in a remarkable coming together of the police department and the communities there. They're on the same page for the first time in many, many years. So what do we see in Los Angeles? As of the date of the publication of that article, May 30th, 2015, homicides were down almost 15% on the year. As of August 31st of 2015, well, now they were up 9% for the year, okay? Particularly bad August, very bloody August in Los Angeles. So I guess I want to know, where are they going to be on that date? December 31st, 2015. Are they going to be up? They're going to be down? They're going to be the same? This is the nature of numbers like this. They go up, they go down, month by month. You have to make year-by-year comparisons over a stretch of years. This is that trend idea again. Maybe be skeptical, okay? So that's what we see in Los Angeles, right? Murders of police, all right? Certainly something that's very serious. And remember, Ms. Mcdonald's allegation is that murders of police in 2014, which is the last year for which the FBI has calculated final numbers, that murders of police were up, what was it, 87%? I forget the exact figure, but in the 80 percentile. What's the evidence here? Murders of police in 2015, down so far this year. Now, I know there's been a lot of coverage of murders of police officers, some very awful murders of police officers, some things that seem to be ambushes. I'm not saying that there's anything good about that, but I am saying for certain the numbers are not going up, they are going down. How do we know this? This comes from the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. That's it does what it says, that they are the sponsors of, the caretakers of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., but they also track deaths of police officers. Here are fatalities of police officers comparing 15 to 14, and you do have fatalities up 10%. But look, they're up for traffic. They're down for firearms-related deaths, which is where most of the murders are, the great majority of the murders. 2 of the firearm-related deaths that you see in 2015, that number 32, these were firing range accidents, training accidents. All right? It's really up with traffic. It's really up with these other causes. It's not up with homicides. All right? Now, why does she say fatalities are up 87%? Now remember, 2014, that was the year she picked, all right? Again, in order to know what numbers really mean, you need to put them in context. Here's a series of bar graphs. This goes back 10 years from 2014, and you can see there is quite a large gap between 2013 and 14. All right, 2014, you had 51 police officers feloniously killed in the line of duty, whereas in 2013 it was below 30. So it did go up quite a bit in 2014. But what you see here, I think, is that 2014 was very much in line with the 10-year trend. Right? You had a few years up from that, from the 50 or so range, a couple down, 13 way down. All right, but 2013 turns out to be a sort of impressive outlier against the rest of them. So she's not wrong when she cites 2014, but it is true that 2013, comparing it only to that, does give you a different impression, I think, than maybe is warranted. So, homicide is up in some other cities this year, in some cities this year. But before we get to that, let's take stock of where we are. Remember, we have 2 questions. Number 1, is crime surging nationwide or in the cities that were cited? No, it does not seem to be. Basically, we're either going down or we're on par with 14. That's true in Pittsburgh, too. Pittsburgh's numbers were, for those of you who've worked in government in Pittsburgh, and there may be a few of you here, may not surprise you to know these were the hardest numbers to come by of any that I found. But we're basically, with homicides, we're close to where we were last year at this time. We were up at a certain point earlier in the year, now we're a little bit down and so forth, but we're not much different. We're not in one of these categories. Homicide is up in some cities this year, and in some of them very dramatically. Very dramatically, all right? So it's not clear to me that the evidence supports the idea that we're in some new national crime wave at all. I just don't see it. I don't think if you're looking at the data, you can actually say that. Could it turn out to be true in 2 or 3? Yeah, it could. It could. But what we know now, and certainly what we knew on May 30th of 2015, there wasn't any evidence for that, all right? There are a few cities where we do seem to have real spikes in homicides. Among those commonly listed, St. Louis, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. All right, there are some others too. Most cities, though, the rate is roughly the same as last year at the same time. Right? It's holding steady, and in many of them it's even down a little bit. There is no evidence of a sharp upward trend in most places. Okay? The long-term downward trend in homicide and in crime in general is still maintaining. And I should point out there have been times during the 20 years, I mean, I've been around long enough, I remember this, there were times during that 20-year period where we had a year spike. All right? I remember this from the mid to late 90s. Things went up dramatically, and then they kind of settled back. And you can see it on the graphs. All right? So you follow the trend, that's what you're still seeing, the same sort of thing. So I suggest that at least in those, let's isolate these and say, what do we see in those cities? What are the most plausible explanations according to the people on the ground. I'm not interested in people writing articles for the Wall Street Journal for the moment. I'd like to know what the people in charge of these efforts actually think. And I want to know, do they think it's the Ferguson effect? I mean, if anybody would know, it would be the chiefs and the people like that in those cities, because crime is fundamentally local, policing is fundamentally local. The problems are local, the solutions, if we have them, they're going to be local too. Those people are going to have a handle on it. That's what they get paid for. And if they don't get a handle on it, out they go. I mean, that's just reality for police chiefs. They have even shorter tenures on average than law school deans. All right? Fun fact, right? All right? So, is it the Ferguson effect? And you would think if it was, right, wouldn't you, as a, if you wanted to be a self-preserving police chief, wouldn't you, oh, I can't control this, it's the Ferguson effect, right? Good. That would put it out of my control and maybe give me a little breathing room. See what they say. Now, I've got information from the first three of those. I don't have it for Baltimore, not because there aren't explanations out there, but because of the events in Baltimore. They have changed so rapidly, and the players have changed with them, that I wasn't really sure who or what I could trust in terms of public statements. You know, since the time of the death of Freddie Gray, the rioting and so forth, the police chief has been fired, recently replaced on a permanent basis. The mayor has said she was running for office. She's not going to run anymore. There's all kinds of political chaos, and so I wasn't really sure what I could make of the information I was getting out of Baltimore. But it is one of the cities that's seeing a spike. I do think we'll be able to get an idea from these others, though: St. Louis, Chicago, Washington, D.C. So let's take St. Louis first. Right? Chief of Police of St. Louis, Ferguson. For those of you, did anybody hear from St. Louis region? All right, I spent 6 months there. Ferguson is right outside St. Louis. You would think if there's any place where you're going to have the Ferguson effect, right? The demonstrations are taking place right there. There's all kinds of, the same county police were involved, the same county police, the St. Louis County Police involved that might cross over into St. Louis City. Here's Chief Sam Dotson. He says, the increase is on Missouri's lax gun laws from his point of view. He said that he's seen a nearly 70% increase in stolen guns so far this year, and the quote indicates those are the reported stolen guns. He's frustrated because they don't even have a law that requires you to report your stolen guns, which, by the way, we don't have either. And so he feels that it's the availability of firearms. And especially the stolen weapons that are floating around. That's what he sees as in back of the homicide spike in his town. Very interesting piece of information here, all right? This graph, I have to explain it a little, and there's always a risk when you're presenting something. You say, I got to explain this. But it'll be worth it, I promise. Okay? So, this graph is a graph of a ratio. Okay? The ratio is homicides in 2014 versus homicides in 2015. All right, they put these together in a ratio. You see, does this thing work? Okay, you see right here where it says 1.0. When the graph is at 1, that means that homicides in 2014 were unchanged from homicides in 2013. All right, so that's the 1.0 point right there, that line. Okay? So what you see, this is month by month, January through December. And you see a big spike right here, right? This is March of 2014 over March of 2013. So 2014, the ratio is much greater. That means many more in 2014. Here, it falls back down to 1 the next month, and then it even decreases for June, and then it's up a little bit, then a little bit more, then it comes down, then it's up, and by December of 2014, it's almost back to 1. All right, what's the significance of this? This was put together by criminologists at the University of Missouri St. Louis, which has one of the best criminology departments in the country. The significance of this is, you see the vertical line? That's the date of the killing of Michael Brown. Okay? So if there's a Ferguson effect, it's really going to show up after that line. That's the idea. Okay? If you're going to see a spike in homicides that could have been caused by the protests, the videos, whatever it is, causing police officers to back up, you'll see the spikes right here. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the biggest spike is over here. All right? So crime did spike, homicides did spike in this region before that. And over here, they went up a little bit, and they also went down twice. All right, so caution, caution, caution. So the St. Louis area doesn't seem to show anything like that. How about Chicago? This is Superintendent Gary McCarthy, such a tough guy that he gets 2 R's for his first name. Here's his explanation, and he's, by the way, he's the sitting chief, obviously, where the IACP is meeting right now this week. And so he's really kind of in the spotlight. He's been in the spotlight all year. Murders in Chicago really are way up. The proliferation of firearms, he says, is overwhelming. You can't go on patrol in the city of Chicago and not find a gun. He goes on in this particular story that I found to explain, very interesting. He says, when he first came to Chicago, and he had been the chief in Newark, before that high up in the NYPD, came to Chicago. One of the things he did is he began to go out on patrol with his officers, even though he was the chief. And he said he saw something really interesting. When they would find young men, typically with guns, young men would not drop the guns and run. So they would actually hold on to them. And he asked his officers, why is that? He says they're more afraid of the penalty that they will incur from the gangs they belong to for losing the firearm than they are from the penalty they will get from the justice system from having the firearm. So if they can keep the gun, run away, and successfully escape, that's what they want. They know if they run away and escape, but they don't have the gun, they're going to be penalized by their outfit. All right? It's kind of a remarkable story. But he has no doubts about where this comes from. And I got to tell you, his mayor is not on the same page. More about that in a minute. This is D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier. The motives of what's happening in the past several weeks, she said after a particularly bloody period this summer, she says, are varied, but one of the common things that we are seeing too many guns in too many homes. All right? Now, you don't have to accept the rationales of these particular people. I will tell you that they are all among the most respected police executives in the country, without a doubt, within law enforcement and outside. You don't have to accept their explanation. But it's, for our purposes, I don't see anybody talking about the Ferguson effect, and that would be an easy out. All right? In fact, Superintendent McCarthy's boss, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, his take on this was, the Ferguson effect, yeah, that's what's doing it. He says, our police department is now fetal. F-E-T-A-L, as in fetal position. All right? We can't do anything because of the Ferguson effect. His words. All right? Imagine being a police officer in Chicago, or being this guy. I mean, he's got to have been ready to kill the mayor, but imagine being a police officer. You go out every day, you do a very difficult job, and what you're hearing from your city leadership is, these guys are fetal. These people are fetal. I mean, jeez, unbelievable. All right, last person. This is Ronald Serpas. He's not a chief right now. He is former chief in New Orleans, post-Katrina, former chief in Nashville, did a very good job in both places. And he was interviewed just Monday after FBI Director Comey sort of doubled down on his remarks that the Ferguson effect is the cause of all this trouble. And here's what he said. This first sentence is a little hard to untangle. He says, candidly, more police chiefs who were listening to the speech than not did not perceive the speech, as a statement that we could agree with. We have spikes in murders throughout the history of our time. I was a chief for 13 years and experienced more than one spike in a year or 2 year period, The fact that we're having a spike in some cities is probably much more to do with issues that are far broader, far deeper, and more impactful than whether or not there's a Ferguson effect. That's in brackets because he actually called it the YouTube effect. all right? He doesn't buy it, and I think that's probably how most of his audience felt. He's a known leader. All right, so what is it? Do we actually have a surge in crime, especially homicides? The data don't bear it out. That's all I can tell you. Do we actually have any police leadership willing to come forward and say, yeah, this is what's happening to my police department. This is why we're having homicides in my town? Not so far, all right? So I think what it really is anecdotes posing as evidence. You all know evidence is not the plural of anecdotes, right? Is it that? Is it misinformed or fact-free analysis? Is it an example of cherry-picking data? Is it an effort to shift blame to those protesting against police tactics? Is it offensive to all the good police officers who are out there? I got to tell you, this is what I'm hearing. This is, you know, I do a lot of work with police. Is it all of the above, or is it something else? Well, it's multiple choice. You decide for yourself, and I don't have a right answer. All right, maybe there's another one you want to propose. But I think the danger that this poses is real in terms of an idea. I mean, ideas matter. Ideas matter. They really do. You may be surprised to hear that in the environment in which we live, in which not only ideas, but facts don't seem to matter a lot. But they do. They really do. They bring people along with them. And that's what I see happening here. And this one really needs us to think hard, because this is something I have seen before. This is the latest way to say that you can have reformed policing or you can have effective policing, but you can't have both. And if you want good public safety, you simply have to give the police the room they need, to give them a free hand, and if that means that some people have to give up the rights that they might have under the law or the Constitution, well, then they just have to give it up. You want the low-crime omelet, you're going to have to break some eggs. That's just the way it is. And I've heard that in New York with Giuliani. I heard it in New York with Ray Kelly and Mayor Bloomberg. I've heard it with terrorism. You must give up your rights in order to be safe. I heard it in the 90s and the 80s with the drug war. I don't accept that. I just don't. That's wrong. People in this country have a right to both, and there is no contradiction between the two. We have to insist that we get both. And we can. The evidence is abundant in this country that there are police departments that do the right thing every day, that don't insist on this trade-off, and they do a very good job of controlling crime. They do it with the aid of their citizens. They do it with them. They don't do it to them. And I'm glad to talk about some of those if you want. But that's the real problem. And when the media, I don't mean to bash them, but when they keep saying, well, here's one side of the argument, here's the other, and one side has nothing to support it, I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem. I'll stop. I'm ready for your questions. Matt. Oh, thank you. Thank you.